Hi, everyone. Welcome to our 19th episode. This episode will begin with Judges chapter 15, verse 9. We are so thankful that you have joined us throughout this study of Judges, and we hope that you will continue to subscribe and share this video with your friends. So, do you want to read?
Sure. Beginning with Judges 15, verse 9. Now the Philistines went up and encamped in Judah, and they deployed themselves against Lehi. And the men of Judah said, "Why have you come up against us?" So they answered, "We've come up to arrest Samson, to do to him what he has done to us." Then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cleft of the rock in Etam and said to Samson, "Do you not know that the Philistines rule over us? What is this you have done to us?" And he said to them, "As they did to me, so I have done to them." But they said to him, "Why have we come down to arrest you, or we have come down to arrest you, that we may deliver you into the hand of the Philistines?" Then Samson said to them, "Swear to me that you will not kill me yourselves." So they spoke to him and said, "No, but we will tie you securely and deliver you into their hand, but we will not surely kill you." And they bound him with 2 new ropes and brought him up from the rock. This is a very interesting passage. So in response, Samson had destroyed their crops because they had taken had killed his wife and in-laws. And revenge, he said in verse 7, "I surely take revenge on you." And he attacked them and with a great slaughter. It doesn't say how many in verse 8. So now the Philistines, they gathered together an actual, small army, I guess, and they come up to try to find Samson. And the men of Judah agree to help the Philistines, actually, to arrest Samson. So what do you make of all of this?
Well, it's surprising that the Israelites would want to arrest Samson and cooperate with the Philistines, which shows, because if you followed along and we've studied throughout the book of Judges, you would realize that at the beginning of the book, whenever they were oppressed by their enemies, they cried out to the Lord. But as you said in the last episode, they're no longer crying out. And here, they're okay with the Philistines ruling over them.
Mm-hmm.
They're okay with being slaves to the Philistines.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's surprising that they don't want to rock the boat, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to create more tension between themselves and the Philistines.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why they're cooperating with the Philistines to arrest one of their very own, and not realizing that Samson was raised up by God to save them from their enemies.
Right. Samson, as a judge, should be able to, what have all the other judges done? The Spirit of the Lord comes upon them, and they raise up an army, right? They raise up an army and go and attack the enemy. These people are not helping Samson. He's all alone.
Right.
He has no support from the people of Israel. They're not helping him. So I think that's a key element here, is that Samson, who is a judge over Israel, is getting no cooperation because they're happy to just keep the status quo,
Right. They're just happy to be enslaved and ruled and oppressed by the Philistines.
Right. Well, I don't want to be too critical, but I'm going to be critical. There are too many Christians who are happy just living below what God wants them to have as Christians. They go to church on Sunday, and they think that's all. Being a Christian is just go do your duty, go to church. Then all week long they struggle. They're miserable. They can't get victory over their their alcoholism or their pornography or whatever it is that is drugs or their envy and strife and family problems and problems at work. But rather than seeking after God and pleading with God for help, they just kind of take it. They just kind of go on and on, like the Israelites here in bondage. We need to stand up and resist the bondage of the enemy.
Well, I think that attitude comes from a lack of relationship with God. The people stopped crying out to God because they were worshiping the gods of the Canaanites. They no longer have a relationship with God, the God who saves them. So they don't know this God.
Right. There's one other element here I wanted to mention, and that is this whole thing about retribution, or in other words, when the Philistines came up, the men of Judah said, "What are you doing?" And they said, "We've come to do to Samson what he did to us." In other words, we've come to get revenge on him. So then they go to arrest Samson and said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm doing to them what they did to me." So each side is just wanting to get revenge for what the other one did, and they just are going back and forth and back and forth. But what's interesting to me is there are two other passages before this in Judges where retribution has been mentioned. Remember chapter 1, where the people of Judah captured Adonai-Bezek, and they cut off his thumbs and his big toes, and he said, "The Lord has repaid me because I did this same thing to other kings." So he admits that he's being repaid for what he had done. And then in the story of Abimelech, didn't that same thing happen? Mm-hmm. In chapter 9, Abimelech killed his brothers on a rock. And then at the end of the chapter, a woman throws a rock on his head and kills him. And the narrator says, so the Lord repaid Abimelech for the sins that he had committed. So this theme of repayment, and revenge is kind of throughout the book of Judges. And that's really what, that's really what disturbs me about a lot of places in the world today that are in constant battle with each other, because each side is trying to repay the other for something they did. And nobody is ever willing to stop the fighting because they always have to repay the other one. So, if you go to, Iraq or Iran or Pakistan, one group is fighting another group. So one group attacks, then the other group attacks. One group, shoots at the others shoot back. It's like the old-fashioned idea of a feud, between two groups of people. And nobody seems to be willing to make peace. It's really strange to me. But anyway, Samson says, "Swear that you will not kill me." So they agree, but they tie him with new ropes, and they bring him to the Philistines. So how does that go for them, Becky? You want to read the next few verses, maybe 15, 16, 17?
Yes. It is interesting that it says new ropes, not old ropes,
right?
Because they know Samson's strength.
Mm-hmm.
So verse 14 says, When he came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting against him. Then the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and the ropes that were on his arms became like flax that is burned with fire, and his bonds broke loose from his hands. He found a fresh jawbone of a donkey, reached out his hand and took it, and killed 1,000 men with it. Then Samson said, with the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of a donkey, I have slain 1,000 men. And so it was when he had finished speaking that he threw the jawbone from his hand and called the place Ramah Lehi. Then he became very thirsty, so he cried out to the Lord and said, You have given this great deliverance by the hand of your servant, and now shall I die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised? So God split the hollow place that is in Lehi, and water came out, and he drank, and his spirit returned, and he revived. Therefore he called its name En-Hakkore, which is in Lehi to this day. And he judged Israel 20 years in the days of the Philistines.
Right. So when the battle started, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. He just broke his bonds, grabbed the jawbone of a donkey, and killed 1,000 men there.
Which is similar to, was it Ehud that used an ox goad?
Ehud used an ox goad. That's right. Yeah. Whatever was at hand. He called the name of the place Ramoth Lehi, which means jawbone height. Jawbone height. Lehi means height. Ramoth or jawbone height. And then he was thirsty, and it's interesting that he calls on God. So
here, yes, this is the first time.
Yeah. So he called on the Lord. It said he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord split open the hollow place, and water came out.
Is it perhaps, do you think Samson realized the Spirit of the Lord came upon him and that's why he was able to defeat his enemies? Or did he just think he was strong naturally? Because, he doesn't need to cry out to the Lord when he's about to fight his enemies. But here, he can't save himself from thirst. And there's no water around. So that's why he calls out to the Lord.
That's a good question. I'm not sure if there's an answer to that question. You don't think he felt something?
Well, maybe at first he knew it was the Spirit of the Lord, but when, sometimes we become accustomed to the workings of the Spirit in our lives. And, we treat the Spirit of the Lord as just an ordinary thing. It's part of everyday life,
yeah.
Right? So maybe he took for granted that the Spirit of the Lord is upon him to save him from his enemies.
Mm-hmm.
But not having water, he can't save himself from that. He needs someone to help him there. So I think he cries out. That's why he cries out to the Lord. And the Lord split in the rock. He does not. It's interesting. He does not tell Samson to split the rock, but God himself splits the hollow there.
Mm-hmm.
The hollow place.
Right.
And water comes out. Which is reminiscent of the Israelites in the wilderness. Of course, Moses splits the rock and water comes out.
Right.
But it's very similar where God provides water to the Israelites back in Exodus, but here God provides water for Samson as well.
Right. And this is one reason why some Bible scholars think the story of Samson as a whole is represents the people of Israel, that Samson represents Israel. And so you have this story, just like Israel in the wilderness, needing water, and God opens a rock. Here, Samson needs water, and he's complaining, did you bring me out here to die, just like the Israelites did. God opens up the rock here, and we'll see we see other parallels between Samson. The fact that Samson is called, by God and separated unto God in the same way Israel is separated unto God through the covenant, so that the Nazirite vows in a way symbolize God's covenant with Israel. And then in chapter 16, you have the fact that Samson visited a harlot, which is used earlier in this book to represent Israel's idolatry. Their worship of idols is called harlotry. So Israel worshiping idols is parallel to Samson visiting a harlot. It's an unfaithfulness, an act of unfaithfulness that is paralleled in the story. And so the story of Samson does bear these similarities to the whole story of Israel. Israel seemingly never being able, with all the blessings of God, never being able to really fully dedicate themselves to the Lord.
Right.
Anything else there, or you want me to start reading chapter 16?
You can start reading chapter 16.
Okay, let's read the first 3 verses. Now Samson went to Gaza, which is another Philistine city, by the way. Samson went to Gaza and saw a harlot there and went in to her. When the Gazites were told, Samson has come here, they surrounded the place and laid in wait for him all night at the gate of the city. They were quiet all night, saying, in the morning when it is daylight, we will kill him. And Samson lay low till midnight. Then he arose at midnight, took hold of the doors of the gate of the city, and the gate posts, pulled them up, bar and all, put them on his shoulders, and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron.
It would have been great for Samson's story to end there at chapter 15. He judged Israel.
Right. That would have been a good ending, wouldn't it?
Yes.
But it's not the
But
end
it's
for
not
Samson.
the end.
So as we already talked about this actually, that visiting the prostitute was very much like Israel, who were unfaithful to God. I do think it's curious here that that there's nothing about the Spirit in this particular story, this passage.
Yeah.
Samson arose and took up the doors of the gate of the city and the gate posts and pulled them up and carried them to the top of the hill. It doesn't say the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. So, I think realistically he couldn't have done that without the Spirit. I think it's implied, personally, I think it's implied. But still, it's not mentioned directly. And I wonder if the immorality of the situation meant that the writer just didn't want to include the Spirit into this story.
Well, you can tell that there's a steady decline in Samson's character, right? So he starts off with something that's perhaps seemingly innocent. He touches, first he wants the Philistine woman. Then he touches the carcass of the lion. And so here, again, he goes down and he sees a prostitute, but a Philistine woman again.
Mm-hmm.
So Samson continues to do what is right in his own eyes, and he refuses to obey God. So I think you're right. That's why maybe the narrator leaves out the phrase, the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him.
Right. Okay, well, you want to go ahead and read a few more verses here, starting, we're introduced to Delilah. This is towards the end of the story now, 16, verse 4. Maybe read through verse 9.
Afterward, it happened that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, "Entice him and find out where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to afflict him, and every one of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver." So Delilah said to Samson, "Please tell me where your great strength lies, and with what you may be bound to afflict you." And Samson said to her, "If they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings, not yet dried, then I shall become weak and be like any other man." So the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 fresh bowstrings, not yet dried, and she bound him with them. Now men were lying in wait, staying with her in the room, and she said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." But he broke the bowstrings as a strand of yarn breaks when it touches fire. So the secret of his strength was not known.
All right. A woman in the valley, well, first of all, it said he loved a woman.
This is the first time it mentions that he loved a woman. But again, it's not an Israelite woman. He's spending too much time with his enemies.
Oh, boy.
He
loved a woman in the valley of Sorek whose name was Delilah.
He's like Psalm 1. He's walking with the enemies.
Yes. Right. So the lords of the Philistines came, and they didn't threaten her. They didn't threaten to burn down her house or whatever. They tried a different tactic this time, offering her money. So if threats don't work, then maybe money will work.
We'll bribe her.
Let's use bribery. And it worked. She apparently did not love him as much as he loved her. It doesn't say Delilah loved Samson. It says Samson loved Delilah. And so she asked him, and he said fresh bowstrings would be strong enough to keep him bound. But he was not telling her the truth, and he broke loose from the bowstrings easily. And so the end of verse 9 says, the secret of his strength was not known. And so then, and I'm not going to read the rest of the chapter because it's kind of repetitious.
But I think before we move on, maybe we should discuss the meaning of Delilah's name. That it might be meaning low or weak or feeble, and perhaps that's why she gave in. Or it could indicate her status in society. So if she's from, an insignificant, she comes from an insignificant background or from a poor background, then the money that they're offering her is enticing to her.
Yeah, that's great. And as far as the money, how much did they say they would give her?
Was it 1,100 pieces of silver?
Right, 1,100 pieces of silver.
Right, and when silver occurs in Scripture, it always, when it deals with money, usually it has a negative connotation behind it. So Joseph's brothers sold him, for 50 shekels of silver, something like that. Judas in the New Testament betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver.
Yeah, right. So this is a lot of money. That's about $6,000 in today's money. We don't know how many there were. It doesn't say how many. It says the lords of the Philistines. We don't know if that was 2 or 4 or 6, but in any case, each one was going to give her about $6,000. That's a lot of money, especially if she was in a a poor situation, lowly situation. So, so she goes on and asks him again, a second time. You have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me how you may be bound. So the second time, he told her new ropes, and they tried that, and that didn't work. So then she says, you've deceived me. Please tell me. And he says, well, weave my hair into like a weaver's loom. And so they tried that, and that didn't work either. So then in verse 15, she said, how can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me 3 times and not told me where your strength lies. And she pestered him daily and pressed him so that his soul was vexed to death. Then he told her all of his heart. And he explained that he was a Nazirite. He had never had his hair cut, but if his hair was to be cut, he would become weak like any other man. And so we all know the story there. She called on somebody to cut his hair, and she lulled him to sleep and cut his hair, and the Philistines came, and the very, very sad phrase occurs here. He did not know the Lord had departed. Huh. He did not know the Lord had departed. And they took him and put out his eyes and brought him to Gaza, bound him with bronze fetters, and he became a grinder in the prison. Very sad story. So, do you want to have any share any comments on that?
Samson has short-term memory.
Yeah.
You would think if after 3 times you've told this woman the supposed secret to his strength, and each time he is bound, that the Philistines come upon him, then, you would begin to think maybe this woman is deceiving me. But he doesn't even think that. Mm-hmm. Which makes me question, how did he judge the people? A judge is supposed to have wisdom in order to judge the people. Mm-hmm. But second, again, I think the fact that he did not know that the Spirit departed from him, I think it strengthens the idea that Samson had become too accustomed to the Spirit of the Lord. And he could not distinguish, when the God's presence was with him and when God's presence was not.
Right.
And it also showed, the fact that he told Delilah his true secret behind his strength. He betrays the Nazirite vow once again, because this time they do cut his hair.
Yeah. Right. Well, people have people ask, well, why did he tell her? Okay, let's think about this for a minute. He touched the deadline, but God still was with him. He got angry and destroyed the Philistine crops, yet God was with him. He killed 1,000 Philistines, God is with him. He visits a prostitute, and still God is giving him strength. So isn't it logical to think that Samson just assumes that no matter what I do, God is still going to be with me?
Right.
Kind of like eternal security.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't matter what you do. God's grace is sufficient for all that. He's going to, and God's grace is sufficient to forgive, but God does, He doesn't always take away the consequences of our sin.
Well, and it gets back to your point from the previous episode that, even though God blesses the position because He loves the people, sooner or later God is going to judge the person who holds the position. So you're not going to get away forever.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Well, we're really running long on time today, so we're going to stop right there. But I just wanted to conclude this section by saying that Samson's surrendering to Delilah here, I think, is symbolic of Israel surrendering to the gods of Canaan. God warned Israel that they played with fire, they would be burned. God had warned them over and over that the gods of the Canaanites would be snares, they would entrap them, and they would bring them to ruin, but they ignored God's warnings. So just like Samson, Israel fell into disobedience and blindness. So this is a picture of Israel during this period of the Judges. Samson had been separated to God as a Nazirite, and Israel had been separated. Look at Leviticus chapter 20, verse 26. It says, "And you shall be holy to me, for I, the Lord, am holy, and I have separated you from the peoples that you should be mine." And he says also, "You shall be a special treasure to me." But just as Samson broke his Nazirite vows, the Israelites violated the covenant. They made a promise to obey the Lord and serve the Lord, but they broke their promises, and in the same way, they ended up in ruin because of their disobedience.
Right.
So do you have any final words for us today, Dr. Hill?
Well, I just want to encourage everyone to serve the Lord faithfully, right? Do not play with fire. And do not think just because you've gotten away with 1 or 2 or 3 sins that God will excuse the rest of your behavior. So, let us remain faithful. We are the church.
Amen. Thank you all for watching today. Please subscribe so you can watch all of the videos and listen to all the podcasts. And we want to invite you to buy a copy of my book, Clothed with the Spirit. You can find it on Amazon.com. May the Lord bless you, and you have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.